conflict that happens on the space station is resolved in kind of a simple way. Hi everyone, welcome to Sound of Fury Book Reviews. I'm Tina, and as usual, I'm joined by my partner in crime, the Lady of the Lake. I read 5 books in November. I probably would have gotten to 6 books, but I started reading Proust. So if you want to follow me in search of lost time, haha, I have a bunch of videos about that. I'm going to do one every week. I'm also going to try to get 3 books done on top of Proust each month. But we'll see. They're probably going to be short and or easy books to read, but it depends what I get for Christmas. Yeah, I really hope I get Harrow the Ninth, so we'll see about that. I have 3 books left on my Goodreads goal this year of 52. That doesn't include the 6 or 7 that I reviewed for Whispering Stories, so I clearly have surpassed my goal, but I still want to, get that in there. So without any further ado, though, here is my wrap-up for November. I actually read 3 indie books this month, the first being Callisto 2.0 by Susan English. So this is a speculative fiction / women's fiction. I received this book from the author in exchange for a fair review. She reached out for me on my website, which is totally cool. So this is a total feast for speculative fiction readers interested in a realistic portrayal of life within a space station or a lunar colony, and it's a scientific foray into living in space. Like if realistic depictions of space without too much drama are like your jam, you will be obsessed with this book. The story follows Callisto, a physicist who is recruited to work on FTL, that's faster than light technology, on the Shambhala space station in the year 2097. So her enthusiasm, though, for the project suffers when her first discovery is unexpected heartbreak. She throws herself into her work and soon blossoms in the utopian female community that the space station is built upon. But conspiracy and betrayal threaten her position and her sense of self. And so it's funny, because while reading it, I wasn't aware that it was a women's fiction, and I was like, why is there so much focus on Callisto's internal struggle and her interpersonal relationships? And then I realized it was women's fiction, and I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, because clearly I didn't read a lot of women's fiction. I think I've read maybe like 2 in my life, and this would be like one of them. But this is one that I actually enjoyed because of the sci-fi elements. So these aspects, as I said, were well researched, they're realistic, they're very interesting, there's a lot of thought put into the physics behind it, there's a lot of focus on like how they eat in space, things like that. Cool little details that science fiction movies and books sometimes just don't think about. They're like, oh, whatever. They don't consider kind of how anti-gravity really does affect a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, the first half of the book does contain a lot of info dumping, and a lot of the dialogue is people explaining stuff to one another, whether it's about their personal lives or the science of the station. Can you not take my phone off my desk? I'm not sure how else it could have been approached. I did keep wondering when the plot was going to kind of pick up, because there's a couple of didactic discussions about toxic masculinity and religion, which were, on par with my views, but kind of slowed down the story. I mean, I wasn't bored or frustrated with any part of the story, but I was just hoping for a bit more intrigue or tension. I was kind of like, what at times. But likewise, as I said, there's hardly any conflict in the novel until the very end, when stuff kind of gets really real. I think I was expecting a bit more because I was reading it like a sci-fi and not as a realistic story about a woman's life, which is what women's fiction is, I'm guessing. While simple resolutions of interpersonal conflict suited the utopian setting, I wanted a bit more story outside of Callie's about what was going on. I think if the major source of conflict happened earlier, or if red herrings of the Foundation were provided, to give Callie a cause of concern, it might have carried a bit more tension in the story. Around 70% of the story, a true conflict did arise, but it was one that I was kind of expecting, and I won't say what happens, obviously, as the spoilers, but I will say that the ending really does, though, make me want a sequel. Like, the intrigue really picked up in the last 20%, and it was really good. I did enjoy the idea of an all-woman space station, and I loved the diversity in the cast. Almost everyone was a different race or culture, and Callisto was a lesbian, so this is definitely an LGBTQ+ book. These aspects I very, very much enjoyed. Every woman was described, though, as beautiful, which felt a little repetitive to me, but it might have actually just been Callie's perspective, because she was kind of on her own for quite a while before you know, kind of isolated and didn't have any relationships for a few years before coming on. So it makes sense that every woman she sees, she's like totally in love with. I kept picturing the woman who recruited Callie. I can't remember her name now because I read this like a month and a half ago. But I kept picturing her as Miranda from Mass Effect, and I just couldn't stop picturing that. So anyway, overall, I thought it was a different and interesting approach to speculative fiction. While it strayed a bit too far into women's fiction for me, I think a reader who loves both these genres would absolutely adore this novel, and I'm really interested in seeing where the series is going. I will definitely read the next book in the series. I'm giving it a 4 to 5 stars, and thank you again to the author for reaching out. That was really awesome, and I'm very glad to have read this book. So the next book that I read was The Art of Dying by Mckeon. I'm assuming that's how you say it. It's a sci-fi action. I received a copy from the author in exchange for a fair review. Same thing. He reached out to me on my website actually quite a few months ago, but then he said that he had to fix it or something. So then, anyway, whatever. So this is a novel for people who like their action extremely bloody and they like their heroines, you know, so badass that they're complete dicks. And this is not a book for everyone, but it's definitely a book for those people who enjoy like Sin City and The Boys. Anything that's overly violent. It's like X-Men on steroids, basically. It's set a couple of decades after a mutant uprising that decimated a city and caused massive loss of life. So the story follows this mercenary Alex Mercer as she takes on a lucrative job to hunt down a mark. It's slowly revealed that the target and Alex, you know, are related to the mutants in some way. The book, they're called GEMS, I guess genetically enhanced human mutants or something like that. And the path to their discovery of this is laden with lots and lots of blood. I did enjoy it. After a bit of a shaky start, it hits its stride very quickly. Alex's motivations and mentality are very easy to understand, and her sarcastic, self-deprecating humor gives her a lot of personality. What I especially liked was that she was a female anti-hero to the extreme. She's mean. She's extremely mean. She doesn't give a crap about hurting feelings or what she looks like. She's grimy, she's disheveled, she's self-sufficient. She's clearly an alcoholic, and she's tough as nails. I like that she didn't have a big turning point, you know, where her nonchalant approach to everything, you know, gets turned because she, you know, falls in love or has to help a child or some stupid thing like that. She is basically a dick the whole time, and she is consistent. Unfortunately for her, she has this accent dialect slang during speaking and during her internal monologue that drove me crazy. I hated it. and I'm not the only one. I glanced at some like reviews on Goodreads to see if I was like in the wrong about this, and no, everybody hates that. So just a warning. If you can ignore weird dialect, then that's fine, but it's just, I don't know. I also like the other female characters. Unlike a lot of books kind of in this genre written by dudes, Alex was not the lone female character, you know, the only one in the group kind of thing. There's a rival mercenary, and the rivalry is not motivated by being in love with the same dude for once. There's random female soldiers, which is something we need a lot more of in action books and movies. Usually if you have a bunch of random soldiers, they're all dudes, you know, there's never any female soldiers, that kind of thing. And then there's another female character, Lovelace, who I have fallen quite in love with. And there's also a bunch of acerbic gun-toting nuns, which were quite funny. I wanted a lot more with the nuns, actually. That's the thing. A lot of the other characters needed a lot more backstory. The action scenes could have been tightened considerably to give more time to developing these people. I had trouble remembering what the characters looked like, and I had no idea how old they were. They just needed a bit more description as well. What I particularly enjoyed about the book in its entirety was how it poked fun at the superhero mutant world. All the mutants have typical silly code names, but these seem to be in reference to, you know, how they're unable to control their powers. I would have liked a bit more focus, though, on the GEMS and their creation and persecution. Along with this, there were some other issues that kept me from absolutely loving the book. While I thought the writing was interesting and the metaphors were sometimes unique, the novel needs another edit. There were some missing words and sentences, instances of weird bolding that came through at random, and some missing punctuation. I can ignore typos, but there were some inconsistencies, like, for example, Alex is 23, but she was a baby during the uprising 16 years ago, so that doesn't line up. And while the novel is in third-person limited, Sometimes it jumps into the perspective of other characters, which was confusing. I also don't understand why a Colombian family would have an English last name of Lovelace. I get it, the name means rebel, but it's not a Spanish name, so that wasn't explained to me. If it had been said that, oh yeah, they had moved there or something like that, then okay. But it wasn't, and I was just like, that's weird. So I think, in my honest opinion, I think it needs a developmental edit. But anyway, I still enjoyed it, and I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. I think that if people can overlook these minor things, and really they were minor, I think I only picked up on them because I'm an editor. It is an adrenaline-fueled, fun book for people who don't mind a lot of blood and a lot of violence and, you know, just some bunch of jerks running around shooting each other. It was a lot of fun. I also read Deal with the Devil by Kit Rocha, which is a dystopian romance. Thankfully, I got this book from the library. I have no idea how I came across it from my TBR, but it was on my Goodreads, list of things to read. Found it at the library, went and got it. The story is very simple. It's enemies to lovers in a dystopian setting. There are 3 women, Nina, Danny, and Maya. There are 4 dudes who are super soldiers. Soldier boys want to rescue their other teammate who was kidnapped by this mysterious other person who wants to exchange this teammate for Nina. Whatever. Soldiers trick the ladies into going with them. Nina and the soldiers' leader, Knox, spend the entire novel wanting to knock boots, and then they have sex, and then they suffer from betrayals. The reason I'm being a bit flippant about this and clearly annoyed is because absolutely nothing on the book cover or jacket suggests that this is a romance, and I was very, very mad. Because while the book has action scenes, the majority of the novel is focused on the typical 3-act formulaic romance tropes. Like this, I don't have an issue with romance as a genre at all. But I do have a problem when the book is marketed as an action-adventure and instead it is a full-on romance. If I had known it was a romance going in, I would not have been so harsh, nor would I have read it. And I'm just really annoyed at this deception. It's like ordering a pizza and then it comes with pineapple and they don't tell you it comes with pineapple. Like, that's disgusting. I'm going to just go into something for a second here. There is a difference between romance as a genre and having a romance in a novel. Most of you readers probably know this, but for someone who's stumbling across this before, I'm just going to say, so I ghost wrote 2 romance novels. One was contemporary and I hated it, and one was like about shapeshifters, and that one was fun. Anyway, I can't say anything else about them. But I was given very specific instructions by the company on how they are to flow and focus, and this novel, based on my knowledge, having written 2, is 100% a romance. From the way the 2 main characters are clearly going to get it on, like from the instant they look at each other that this is going to happen, to the constant reiteration of attraction, to the long and rather boring sex scenes. The novel puts the romance on the forefront and the story on the back burner, and because it's intended just to be, an entertaining, sexy romp. It's not meant to be a real story in the sense of a novel, a science fiction novel, for example. Again, I'm not trying to disparage or put down romance. I think romance is a valid genre and it has its place. I just don't like being blindsided by one when I'm assuming I'm getting a dystopian or post-apocalyptic adventure story. There, rant for you. I'm going to keep going. The world building, though, is hardly fleshed out. Is it post-apocalyptic? Is it dystopian? We don't know! I never once felt like the characters were living under any sort of hardship. They have all the food, alcohol, clothing, weapons, ammo, and gas they need to travel around on their glorified trip to Bone Town. That's not actually where they're going. I was being silly. The story itself is quite boring, and the plot was full of holes and obvious twists. While there are action scenes, they clearly exist as a way to show off Knox and Nina to one another, how sexy they are. There's copious descriptions of how much they attracted to one another, to the extent that every time they did it, I was like, I should be doing shots here. I drink all the alcohol in my house. I didn't feel an actual connection between them, though. Like, aside from finding each other hot, they don't really bond on an emotional level. I mean, we're told they do, but I didn't really believe it. There was too much of the physical attraction kind of bullshit in the way. I was much more interested in the subtle attraction between Maya and Gray, truth be told, but maybe because it's, wasn't so in your face. For someone who prefers a long, painfully drawn out romance, or at least one with more emotional resonance, knowing the characters were going to have sex at the midway point of the story was hardly stimulating for me. I'm also pretty sure that, given the way that romance novels tend to go, there's going to be like 4 more of these, and each one is going to be on a different romance in the story that we got a glimpse of in this book. Not surprised. Anyway, what is the really most disappointing thing about this story is the whole mercenary librarians thing. The cover plays it up so much, but it has no relevance to the story. They talk about this aspect only briefly, and it's not like they're traveling around with these dudes hunting for books. Like, my ire with the book rose the most when I realized I was duped by a premise that didn't pan out. Like, that premise sounds amazing, but no, it's not like that at all. So do I like anything about this story? It was fast. It was easy to read. If it hadn't been easy to read, I would have given up. And I don't rarely DNF books, but anyway, I like Denny, I guess, because she, like, didn't give a shit, and that's kind of how I felt about this whole book. I'm giving it a 2 out of 5. I would almost give it a 1.5 out of 5, to be honest, but there were some parts that made me laugh, so you can have your extra 0.5. Anyway, if you love romance, if you love happily ever after, if you love muscle-bound soldier boys, feisty ladies, and a dystopia, then you'll probably like this, and that's fine. It's not a terrible book. I just am so mad at how it was marketed that it really much just pissed me off. Anyway, I'm pissed off. I also read another indie book called Strand, The Silver Radio by Justin Attas. It is a dystopian post-apocalyptic science fiction. I received it from Whispering Stories, as I'm a guest reviewer on that website. So it's an intriguing story of a seemingly mediocre young man who comes of age in a post-apocalyptic dystopian world. It follows Quincy, who is a young adult who is burdened, with an inability to fit in. Not just socially, but because he doesn't have a specific career path laid out for him, as does everyone else in the society that he lives in. So he lives in this thing called the Strand, which is a massive 3-tiered structure surviving above a dismal and struggling landscape. So, as I said, he has no skills to serve his population, so upon graduation from high school, he is going to be cast down with the supposed dregs of society. Instead of accepting this blindly, he travels willingly into these nether zones and unwittingly begins a rebellion against the powers that be. See, that's a well-thought-out dystopian world. Deal with the devil. So the novel has a rather rough start, as there's not a lot of exposition into the world. Most of my understanding of the Strand came from the blurb and not from the story, which is never a good thing. But in the initial chapters, rather than being engrossed by Quincy's journey, I was confused as to why the Strand is so bad that Quincy would join with these anarchists. We're also not told how he met these people and what would compel him to commit such a strong act. I'm not really spoiling a lot. This happens in like the first 2 chapters. There's not a lot of backstory into Quincy himself. His romantic relationship and his friendship with this guy named Leon are very, very flat. I felt nothing towards that. Yet the novel grows and it becomes endearing to you the more you, once you get through the first 20%, it gets way better. I like nothing better than a journey through a new world, so it was fun to tag along with Quincy while he was visiting different places. I really liked Quincy, actually. I also enjoyed the pirate Corman. He was pretty funny. The minor characters in general, though, required a lot more backstory. Oftentimes a character will deny Quincy, though, easily imparted information that for reasons that don't make sense. It seemed like a kind of a novice move, to be completely honest. There's an attempt to humanize and explain the motivations of the antagonists, but it's given far too late in the story. The final few chapters, though, including the introduction of a new character clearly intended for a sequel, were actually quite fantastic. The novel really picks up around the 75% mark with an ending that I did not expect, and that was really well done. What the story has going for it most is the message of how what we perceive as mediocrity or lack of drive in a teenager is often a mask for low self-worth. As Quincy grows to understand himself as a person, his skills and emotions broaden. In the end, because he understands his place in the world and himself, he comes into his own. It's a character-driven story for sure. I give it a 3.5 out of 5. People who like dystopias and character-driven stories will definitely like this one. I will also note that the pictures at the start of each chapter were distracting and that they were created by different artists with varying styles and skill level. Had they been done by the same person or perhaps included at the end as a tribute from his friends, it might have worked, but I found them very distracting. I assumed Quincy was supposed to be the artist tracking his journey when I first saw these pictures, but then I wasn't sure why the pictures clearly weren't drawn by the same person, so I just don't understand why they were really included. Hello! Me here. So I did read another book in November. It was Big Planet by Vance, and I had recorded a review of it, and then it cut off halfway through, as my camera tends to do for some reason, so I have to do it again. And I figured, well, this is actually a long review because it's part of my old school science fiction blog, so I was like, why don't I just review these separately as little mini reviews? So that's what I'm going to do from now on, and if you want to watch that, I'll be posting it shortly after this review. So again, thanks for watching, and I guess like and subscribe and all whatever people are supposed to do. Thank you!
Stop it, Denny.